Okay, picking up where we left off on page 213, we're talking about fonts and the use of fonts. Serif style fonts are the ones that are really designed for print media and they work great. But this is a bright screen most of the time, a very bright screen, and the contrast is incredibly bright between the dark letters and the background. And so serifs just don't work as well. So most web pages recommend use a sans serif, meaning no serifs. The ones that I just talked about, the Arial, Verdana, and Georgia, all are those types. So we're cool. The sizes. I might build this on my machine. I look at it and I go, yeah, that looks good. But then I bring it up on a Mac and the font, the same font, may look bigger or smaller. It has an awful lot to do with screen resolution and this text size ratio on your machine. There's all sorts of weird things. So you really can't tell how big the text is really going to be. I mean, you can kind of sort of get an idea, but once again, have multiple browsers and maybe even multiple machines to be able to see what this thing. By the way, there is a website out there that you can upload a file, and it will launch it on about 40 different machines and browsers simultaneously, and you can go look to see. Fantastic. We'll talk about that later. Weight. We're talking about the use of bold and things like this. For example, I use bold here to separate. This is like a dictionary list. I use bold to kind of separate these kind of things because it just made it look cool. But don't overdo it. If you make everything bold, well then nothing is bold, right? Okay. Color. There's for accessibility standards. There is a number on what the contrast ratio should be between foreground and background. It's difficult for you to gauge that, but you can send your page again to this website, and it'll tell you what the contrast ratio is. 4.5 to 1. So yeah, got to make sure those things. The links. Most human beings' eyeballs want to be stayed centered in a very, very narrow. Most people, when they read a piece of text, right, they don't do it like this. They don't turn their head and read the entire line like that. Their heads typically stay still. So don't make your web page too big, too wide, because that's just the way humans read. Humans read kind of in the center of their field of vision. The way they say it is somewhere around between 50 and 75 characters per line. So this is about right. This is about the number of characters you ought to have on a line. Okay, just telling you. So if you have a really, really wide screen monitor, I don't want to have my web page, squashed and stretched so the line goes all the way across my, I got 24-inch wide screen monitor, and I don't want to have to turn my head to be able to read. So yeah, we're going to show you how to fix that. Alignment. It's easier for humans to, at least in our portion of the world, to have things aligned on the left margin and not centered. A centered paragraph, unless it's something like a title or something where it doesn't really matter that much. But a paragraph of text, don't center a paragraph of text. That's difficult for people to read. Hyperlinks. We talked about this before. That you never should you have a hyperlink that says click here. So describe what it is you're doing and then give a descriptive name of what it is you're getting right. And particularly if you're doing a download, I want to know, am I downloading an exe file, a zip file, in this case an Excel spreadsheet? I want to know the file extension. Yeah. So yeah, please tell me in the description. Reading level. Know your audience. Once again, you can submit your web page to someplace and it'll tell you what the reading level is. And of course, you have to know your audience. If you don't know your audience, well, then the number it brings back is going to be kind of useless. 8th grade level for reading is pretty common. That's what most people do for television and magazines and newspapers, unless you get to the technical areas, unfortunately like what we're doing now, where the reading level is going to be a little higher. But, don't be using some really big highfalutin words and expect people to understand you. Spelling and grammar, of course, come on. Most of the web authoring tools have like a spell check thing, or maybe even a grammar check. I know people who will compose their web content for the web page in Microsoft Word, mainly because they're familiar with it, right? I mean, practically everyone knows how to use Word. And it's got a very good spell check and grammar tool. And so you fill in all your stuff, and then when you're happy with it and you've proofread it, then you just copy and paste it inside your web page, and you're good to go. So if your web authoring tool doesn't have spell check, well, just do spell check someplace else. Okay, page 214, they start talking about the use of color. And there's an entire, remember I talked about, the visual design. There's an entire science on the theory of color. Who knew? And it's all about how you pick complementary colors. And it starts with the concept of this thing called the color wheel. And so some people, if you go into an interior design store and you say, I want to get to paint my kitchen, and you said, I'm going to paint it this color, they'd say, you really need to have a warmer color for your walls in your kitchen. And I'm thinking, warm? What the heck are they talking about? But if you're an interior designer, you know about cool colors and warm colors. That's what we're talking about. Okay, so on page 510, I mentioned how some people pick colors on their web page to match a photo. So you have a prominent photo that's going to be like a big prominent photo in your web page, or perhaps it's the background for your entire web page. Well, then pick colors off of that complement the background. Now, if you're using just a plain old background, well, then there's some other techniques. This one using the color wheel on page 215. There's 3 terms you really need to know in order for this part to make any sense. One is shade. So if I have a shade of green, shade means make it darker. All right? Tint. A tint of green means make it lighter. So essentially, adding black to this would be a shade. Adding white to this would be a tint. And then there's tone, where I just subdue the color. I add gray. I add 50% white and 50. If I'm mixing paint, I'd put 1 ounce of white to make tint, 1 ounce of black to make shade, and then a half an ounce of white and a half an ounce of black together. Okay, to make a tone. So those are the 3 terms. So on page 216, they talk about the options you have for picking a color scheme based upon this color wheel. And so some of the rules are monochromatic. Basically, just pick one color. I'll pick one. Boing, this one right here. And then just alter the shade, tint, and tone. That's all you do. That's one way. The next one talks about analogous, where I pick a color and then I use like the one before it and the one after it. So green is my main color, and then I use yellow and this darker green. So I use 3 in a row. Okay, that looks pretty cool. Complementary colors, which means if I have this as a main color, exactly opposite of that is the other color. That works. Split complementary, where I have a main and an opposite and the adjacents to the opposite. A triad, which means I pick like a triangle. I'll pick whatever is the equal distance. So I pick this one, and this one. So whatever, just like a triangle. Equal distance. If I skip 3, pick 1, skip 3, pick 1 kind of thing. And then, of course, you can have 2 sets of... I can have complements over here and then complements over here to make 4 colors that kind of match. Again, this is highfalutin artistic stuff, and quite frankly, I'm not an artist, but... all my taste is in my mouth, so I'm just going to assume that they would know what they're talking about, and I'll try my best to pick colors that match. Accessibility, again, page 217. The contrast ratio, particularly those things when you have a background color and a foreground, like a background color in text. For small text, it's supposed to be 4.5 to 1. And once again, unless you've got one of those cool little doodads that you can put on the screen and measure the contrast ratio, which I suspect you do not have, then once again, you can go off to this special website and it'll do the thing for you and tell you if your contrast ratio is cool or not. The other thing about accessibility is never ever, I've said this a gazillion times too, never ever make it have color alone. You can't like go to a chart and say, look at the red bar compared to the green bar on the following chart. No, that's not going to work. Because if you're colorblind or you're on a monochrome screen, I can't tell which bar you're talking about. All right. The target audience. Now, the sense of color changes over age. When you're a little kid, man, those bright colors like the Sesame Street one, okay, that's what they like. If you're a teenager, particularly like in high school, maybe you kind of like dark theme, okay? And maybe if you're a senior, you want very high contrast in your colors so that it's visually apparent, you know. And in fact, most senior sites, like the example they have in the book, basically just have a white background. I'm just telling you. Okay. On page 220, they change the subject and start talking about graphics. Now, I mentioned to you guys before the difference between the file size and the dimensions in which they appear on the actual Honest to God webpage. So I'm going to go back to mine, of course. So this image, I specifically physically sized the image so that it would fit on that screen. I know how wide my screen is here, and I know what the margins are, and so I basically resized this thing so that it fit exactly where I wanted it. And after I've resized it, I mean, when I did a screen capture, I got this gargantuan thing, but then I cropped it, and then I resized it, and then I stored it, and then I pulled it in here. So you got to do a lot of stuff. Now, admittedly, it's not done inside your web authoring. I mean, I personally use a program called Paint Shop Pro. I don't know, I've been using it for years. But, you know, Adobe Photoshop, whatever. You can use Microsoft Paint. Some sort of graphics program that allow you to resize things. And one more time, you know, cropping and enlarging and maybe, you know, draw arrows, something that kind of brings you to the attention. You don't want to have just a graphic saying, well, go figure it out yourself. Let me give you an extreme example of this. Here's an example of one where I'm trying to explain to someone how to get to the favorites bar in Microsoft Edge. And so I tell them, you know, click on this, and then click on this, and then go expand this favorites bar folder. So this graphic, first of all, it's very nicely cropped, and it's shrunk down. I think I did this one at 75%, so it's not live. And then when I display this on the screen, I don't have to worry about the width and the height being different, and it's good to go. I did all this outside. I did it all in Paint Shop Pro. Cool? All right. There's a thing that you can use called alias and anti-alias, and we're talking about fonts inside a graphic. I'm not talking about fonts on your web page, the text. I'm talking about this. Okay. By default, when you put text inside graphics, there's a choice, and it happens in, you know, basically, if you were to zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, it looks like a screen door. I mean, it's just rows and columns of little pixels that either have a blue in it or not. And if you zoom in an awful lot, diagonal lines look ridiculous because it's got a blue spot here and a white spot and a blue spot and a white spot and a blue spot and a white spot, and it makes it really jagged. So anti-alias is a way that the graphics software can smooth that thing out. Okay, I said an awful lot of words, but the bottom line is, when you're putting text inside graphics, use anti-aliased fonts. Okay, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.